Good morning. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the April She Geeks Out event. In full transparency, I had to say March up until 2 seconds ago because what is time? My name is Rachel Murray. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of She Geeks Out. And for those of you who are new to us, we run events for women in tech and tech-adjacent roles. We offer corporate training on diversity, equity, and inclusion. As we begin our event, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining from a location that was originally inhabited by Indigenous people, specifically the Kumeyaay, who live at the northern border of Baja California in Mexico and the southern border of California. I'm in San Diego. I'm very fortunate. I will not talk about the weather, as I've been told by my lovely colleagues here who are on the screen with me. No, you are, Stephanie, you are right. I am also going to include a link in chat in case you want to learn a little bit more about land acknowledgement and why it matters. So I know there are many other, well, virtual at least, places you could have chosen to be today. So thank you so much for coming here. I am so excited to give a warm thank you to Buildium for hosting today's event. And before we get this party started, I want to pass the mic over very briefly. I know we have our lovely speakers here, which we will get to shortly. But first, I'm going to get Morgan Wedge on the stage to say a few words about the incredible, wonderful, longtime supporter and partner of SGO. And first, I have to go to attendees. I should also note that one that we always embrace here is embrace your awkward. And that is definitely the case, both in virtual and in real life moments. So I just bringing Morgan up on the stage. Hey,
hi.
Look at you. I know, it's so wild, right? We're gonna have you come up and say a few words. I'll let you.
Thank you so much. Well, yes, we have loved our partnership with She Geeks Out for a long time now. So I'm Morgan Wedge. I'm a recruiter at Buildium. Mariel Ecker's also a speaker, and she's from Buildium on our sales team as well. So we're the sponsor of today's event. In case you aren't familiar with Buildium, we're a Boston-based tech company. Our product is an all-in-one property management software platform designed to help real estate professionals really take control of their business. So streamlining their accounting, maintenance, communications, and leasing processes in the cloud. And we can talk a little bit more after the event. I won't take up too much time from the speakers, but myself and a few Buildium will be at the networking event after this discussion. If you want to drop by, I wouldn't be a recruiter if I didn't mention that we're hiring across a number of departments, and you don't necessarily have to be Boston-based. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions about those roles, but we're excited to be here, and I'll pass it back to Rachel and the speakers.
Thank you so much, Morgan. And I put a little link in the chat to a very important page on the interwebs. Thanks so much, Morgan. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. All righty. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. Please feel free to use the chat. I saw many of you already started to use it, so it's great. We also have a Q&A function. So feel free to use that as well. You are allowed to upvote there. And then also, I also want to note very quickly, it's so fun multitasking like this, is we do have a code of conduct. We did include it in the event registration, but I do want to note it here, especially in this virtual space where people are meeting in small groups. We want to make sure that we bring it to people's attention. Happily, we have had 0 problems that we are aware of so far, and so we're happy that is the case. Once the panel is over, we'll leave some time for further networking, and if you need to find me afterwards, I will be at the She Geeks Ask She Geeks Out table. So, without further ado, I'm so excited to speak with 3 incredible women. We have Stephanie Castaños from Resilient Coders, we have Devin Grilly from Rock Pivot, and we have Mariel Ecker from Buildium. I am not going to waste any more time. Their bios, their incredible bios, are to the right so you can read it. We were fortunate enough to have loads of questions from all of you when you registered for the event. So what we did was we took all those questions, we smushed the ones that made sense together, and then we sort of bucketed them into 4 themes. One is figuring it out. Another one is emotional mental preparedness. Another one is networking. And then the 4th one is advocating for your needs. And so we're going to cover those. But if you have other questions that we haven't gotten to, feel free to put them in the Q&A. And if we have time, we'll make time to make sure we get to those questions because we want to honor the fact that you are here live with us. And we'll get this party started. So the first one we wanted to do is talk about figuring it out. So in general, and this will be open to anyone who wants to answer it, that's how we're going to do this, is one question that we got, which is a great, I think, way to start it off, is when do you think it's time to, how do you tell when it's time to evaluate whether you even need a transition? How do I even decide which career path to take? Yeah, when is the right time? I think really about timing. And what we're going to be doing here is just to make it clear, by the way, is we're talking about career transition. So we want to talk about when is a good time. And I'll put myself on mute. So whoever wants to take the floor, please.
We're all being so polite. I'll start and say, ideally, I think it's something that should be picked up on a regular basis to just look at, like, hey, is this where I thought I wanted to be? Sometimes what we thought we wanted changes over time. So having like a regular cadence where you sort of check in with yourself and your goals and reassess, like, what is that 5-year plan is when. And then you might have some insights. I think we're seeing a lot of people looking to change now because for the first time maybe ever, due to the pandemic and not having to drive hours in traffic to work and back, they have the time to rift and go, hey, this isn't what I thought I would be doing at this point in my life.
Anyone else want to add?
Yeah. So I would second that. I think, really checking in with yourself and trying to just think about, like, am I enjoying my day-to-day? Am I feeling fulfilled? Some of the goals that I have, am I achieving them? Is there upward mobility? Those are all things that I would think about. I personally had a job prior to Buildium where I remember I would wake every day and just kind of mentally coach myself, like, okay, just get through today. And then the next day, just get through tomorrow and it'll be Friday. And I realized then that it just wasn't the right fit for me. If you're finding yourself dreading to log on, or like you're just kind of rut, then that's a good time. And oftentimes, I think to Devin's point, if you're checking in regularly, that will give you enough time to really start to make a good plan if you want to make a switch, so that you're not making it when you're, absolutely at your wit's end.
Mm-hmm.
And I just agree with both of Mariel and Devin. If there's no growth in the company anymore, if for me, the worst one also, like Mariel said, my last job, it came to be where I just hated going to work. Like, it was just a feeling of just like, I really, like, it's Sunday's over, tomorrow I have to get there. And that, when that's happening, it's time. Like, you need to start thinking about what's next for you.
Yeah. And so how do you even decide what career path to take? Say you're really, you're not happy with what is happening now, and you're figuring it might be your job, but it might be the industry, it might be your boss, like, who knows, but you're starting to question your career path. How do you even sort of start to figure that out? And I'll start with Devin, because you are Rock the Pivot, and I feel like this is your jam. So I was going to call that.
So just to make sure I'm clear, so it's, how do you get started?
Yeah.
So you've done the reflection.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I'm either dreading this, or maybe it's not what I thought it would be. A lot of times what I see is people know a lot what they don't want. They can't really name what they do want. And so that's the first step, is figuring out, okay, why do I hate this job? And what do I like about it? When was a time that I really loved this job? There had to have been a time, like, why did you start?
Mm-hmm.
What's changed? Or maybe, like, that's not satisfying anymore. I'm bored. That's the big thing. But you've got to be able to name it and figure out, like, okay, these are the key pieces. Yeah. Knowing your core values, the things that motivate you, is usually the very first step.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I don't know. Mariel, go for it.
Yeah, I was just second what Devin said. I think one thing I've done in the past that's helped me is to actually just write out, like make a list. Here are the things in my job that I really love. Maybe it's working with people or it's, certain types of projects. So try to really isolate, like, what are things that you really find fulfilling and rewarding within your current role. And I think to Devin's point, what are those things that I absolutely know I don't enjoy? And then I think once you start to really narrow that down, I think the next phase is doing a lot of research, working your network. There's much great stuff online, different forums, groups like this, where you can start to meet people and just really figure out like what type of role might encompass more of those things that I really enjoy.
I love that.
Yeah, I used to book myself into this just conference room, just write everything that Devin and Mariel said into buckets. And then I would start researching, okay, like it was literally a full day of Stephanie in a conference room. And I would do research of like, all right, what are the potential careers? Because I really don't like this, but this community work has all these different things that I like about sales, but not necessarily sales, Mm-hmm. And so there was all these different transferable skills that I started putting into like different careers that might be something that I will enjoy or something that I would like to pursue in the future. Mm-hmm. The research, like tapping into the network before buying a certification or before paying for a class, I think it's best to just reach out to those individuals, even if they're not in your network, sending them a call message of just like I'm interested in transitioning to UX. It might be I have a graphic design background, or I'm an artist and I really want to transition to that opportunity or that career. And so reaching out to them, most people are honestly going to get back to you and be like, absolutely, like I'm happy to like spend like 20 minutes, 30 minutes talking to you on a coffee chat, right? Even if it's virtual, just to give you my insight of like how I got to be where I am. And then you realize, yes, that's the career path that I want to pursue, or no, I absolutely like hate that. Like this is definitely not where I want to go. So definitely talking to people before investing any money into any courses or anything like that.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. It is worth noting too, Stephanie, that you work for Resilient Coders, which I think a lot of folks are. That's one of the reasons why you're here, is that also the organization that you support is people who are actually sort of transitioning and figuring out what it is they do, and like getting into engineering, it's a different thing, or moving into marketing or whatever it is that you're going to do. Yeah, figuring that out and what you love. I love everything that you said. I also want to note that Devin included a link. I did just click on it because I was curious and it didn't work. So I don't know if that needed, I want to make sure, because whatever it was, I personally love to identify my core values. So just in case I don't know what they are, you got to keep checking. So I love that. So thank you so much for doing that. So let's say, okay, and Stephanie, I think you started to get down this road, which is great, is once you sort of figure it out, okay, I've done my due diligence, I think I really want to move into this direction. Maybe I want to be a graphic designer, et cetera. I've had some initial conversations with people. This is really exciting to me. Then the question is, like, how do you actually change your career path without and someone specifically asked us, without the right skills or without experience? How do you do that without worrying that, you're going to, basically, not have that experience? How do you handle that transition? I'll kick it over to Stephanie because you're the last person to speak.
That sounds good. I think that's something that we do at Resilient Coders. And in the past, I've been working with people who are career changers for the past 6 years, right? And so the thing to start building, and it depends, but most of the time for marketing, designers, engineers, it requires you to start building your portfolio of your work, right? And so I guess I would start off with there's always skills that are transferable, first of all. No matter if you're working as a retail associate, that's talking to people, customer support, talking to clients, you're going to be dealing with that in any tech company, right? Or whatever you decide to go for. But there's always a way. And it's so interesting when I'm meeting one-on-one with my students and they're like, oh, I don't want to put that because like I was a security guard. And I'm like, no, but you were talking to clients, you were making sure the building was secure, you were having all this like protocol, you follow, like you were leading a team of like 5 other security guards, right? There's always things that are transferable skills. So don't think that that's not like a thing that you cannot find anything. And then after that, put like kind of like the mix and match, right? Like what are the things that are going to transfer, so you can start building that story, so you can start selling yourself to those companies with the right, like, hey, like I was a security guard, I manage people, so I do well working with other team members, especially pushing deadlines. And so there's ways that you can actually build your story in a way that you're selling yourself to when it comes to interviews. Yeah. So that's one thing, like kind of the mix and match to that, like buckets of like listing of all your skills. And then the projects, like you have to start working. Once you identified the area that you definitely want to go into, start building those projects. I don't really like having people working for free, but sometimes like, even if it's like something that they might help you out in exchange, right? Like whether that's like a subscription or something, we can talk more about that because I don't want to be too much into this stuff, but there's ways that you can volunteer with startup companies that can eventually help you find another job. There's ways that you can pitch your idea to a coffee shop for building their website, right? So there's all these different ways that you can start thinking about building your portfolio. And sorry, I focus too much on engineering because that's what I do right now. But I'll let Devin and Mariel jump in.
Yeah, I think Stephanie brought up a lot of great points, and I would echo all of them. I think, to her point, like there are always skills that are going to be useful no matter where you go. And I think part of it is shifting your mindset a little bit to start looking at those different experiences as strengths as opposed to things that are holding you back. So for example, in sales, right, we see a lot of times people come in with restaurant experience, and an example of how you might transition that is like, I'm well with people, I'm good at asking questions and figuring out what people want and better understanding them, I'm good in a fast-paced environment. So there's always ways. It just requires you to get a little creative. And I think, some things that might help you there too, as you're trying to figure out which skills are going to be best, is like do some informational interviews, meet with maybe recruiters, career coaches, those types of people that might help you highlight what those skill sets are. And then you start building that story, like Stephanie said, so that you're really focusing on that as opposed to just the jobs that you're doing, but more so like, here's how my skill sets make me unique and set me apart. And if anything, I feel like as a hiring manager, I'm always looking for people that have fresh, new perspectives on things. And I think a lot of times if you come from some different backgrounds, you bring that. So again, I think, a lot of it is just like, don't sell yourself short and make sure that you're looking at all of your experiences and trying to think of what value that could add to that company.
I would say like also to analyze what the truth is about the skills that are required that you don't have. Sometimes there's assumptions about what you need that are not aligned with the actuality. And often that comes from the imposter syndrome and feeling like, if I just have this piece of paper that says like, I am officially a fill in the blank, then that gives me the legitimacy. Oh, I don't have time to go to graduate school. Like we create like all of these barriers to making change that may not be necessary. Like if you want to be a surgeon, for sure, if you don't know how to do surgery, you probably need to do a lot of like skill development. But if you're going from like project manager to product manager, there's a lot more overlap.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. And I actually want to go to one of the questions that came in, which I think is relevant to this discussion. And it's about transitioning after being out of the workforce for a couple of years. I think we're seeing that more and more common. I think that's definitely going to be a thing going forward for sure, given this past year. Would love to hear about your thoughts on that. Maybe I'll start with Mariel this time. We'll call on you if you're open to it.
Yeah, of course. And just to confirm, to make sure I understand correctly, if you're coming back into the workforce, maybe from having a hiatus, looking for a job, that sort of thing.
Yeah, we'll go with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think to your point, Rachel, coming out of COVID, it's obviously been a really challenging year for everyone. And I think this is going to be a reality that a lot of people are dealing with. One thing I would say there, so on that lens, I think hiring managers and companies are going to be more understanding because of that. But I also think, too, if you have the ability to show that you made the most out of a really difficult time. So, were there courses you maybe took or books you read or groups you joined, is there anything you can kind of bring to just show that during that time you made the most of it and you still tried to better yourself? I think that's something that, for me as a manager, I would be looking for. And I think too, it's always casting a wide net and trying to just get a resume and make as many connections with people as possible. And it's a difficult time, but I think if you continue to just really lean in there, you will find the right opportunity and the right company will understand that it was a difficult year. But, again, I think if you can show you try to work on some skill sets or work on some things for yourself during that time, then that helps to illustrate some of your potential there as a future employee.
Love that. Yeah. And Devin, I saw you pop a link in that chat, which is I'm a big fan of that organization. I don't know if you want to add anything about that or.
Just that if it is an extended, especially if you're taking 2 years off or something, there's organizations out there that want you to get back into the workforce. And so there's companies have these returnships that just refresh rather than restarting a career, especially in the STEM fields, because there's a need for more senior folks and they don't want you to throw that away. So take a look. That's just one. I know that there's others, but that's the one that came pop.
Love it.
Yeah, and just to add, there's some community groups too, especially for moms. So the moms that took a break to take care of their kids, and they return, and it varies the age, right? How long they have been from the workforce. And so there's different groups out there, local organizations too, that are helping with re-entering. I'll see if I can find some of those links and I'll pop them in there. But if not, I'll send them to Rachel because that's something that Resilient Coders is also trying to work with organizations that are working with moms, but also folks who have criminal backgrounds, right? So people who just got out of jail and they haven't been working for 3-4 years, right? And now they're coming back. And so there's a lot of different organizations out there. So I would say try to also reach out to those different groups because they also might have the connections to, depending on what area you want to focus on, they might be able to give you some insight of what's available.
Yeah, I love that. And since we're talking about that too, and folks that are further along in their career, someone had asked this question, and someone asked about career building after, when you're in your 40s, which is so old. That's what I am. So I'm fine. I feel like a very young 40s. What does that even mean? But the question that this person asked is it still worth it? I certainly have my own thoughts around it. But I guess it's about age. You've already invested 20 years in your career, 25 years in your career. Does it make sense at this point to actually think about pivoting and getting into something new? And yeah, anyone who wants to take that.
I can just share a little bit of my experience with some of our students in my last company. It was literally, our slogan was find a career you love, right? So there was a lot of people. Our youngest student was 18 years old and our oldest student was 60. Our oldest student, the oldest that I got was 64, 65. And so it was and they were all in one cohort of 45 people, right? And honestly, it was all, again, going back to how you tell your story. Yeah. Because especially with a lot in this, we can go into the rabbit hole about ageism in tech companies right now, but I'm going to steer away from that. But
you don't need to steer away from that because that's a very real thing.
But it's a real thing, right? And it happened that those companies out there, you don't want to work for those companies, right? And so, but out there, there's a need, I think Devin, you touched on this, there's a need for senior engineers, right? And a lot of this folks, communities that are out there who have been in the industry for a while, right? They have all these skills that they can bring to the table because they've seen either a business grow, they run their own companies before, they've been working with a team of like 20 individuals. So there's all these different skills that they bring to the table. So I've seen people make those career changes. I know it is possible. So I think it's just like thinking about like being focused, right? Because you also don't want to be wasting time on something that you're not interested in. So I think it's almost like the same steps of like figuring things out first before jumping right into that new career. What I like to say is like, if you're going to invest in a program and going to pay for it because you're sure this is the career change you're going to do, think about as the organization, what are the placement, how do they place their graduates, right? Because that's the thing, like if they're not going to help you with the job search, I would not like invest in that organization, right? Because a lot of them is like, we're going to provide the training and then you figure it out because that's not guaranteed. We're not going to do that. Like, no, like you're training me, you should have some partners out there, right? There should be somebody like helping you out. So especially when, you're at that age where you're like, all right, this is like what I'm going to do. Like I'm going to pivot my career. You want to make sure that somebody's going to be there also helping you tell your story. And if you're paying for it, they definitely better have someone that is going to help.
Love that. Thank you. That was fantastic. Does anyone else have anything to add?
I'll just share my quick math example that we did on your Instagram.
That's so good.
And so if you're 40, I wrote it down so I wouldn't mess with the math. If you're 40 and you're planning on retiring at 65, let's say, that's 25 years between now and retirement. 25 years ago, you were 15 years old. You hadn't even graduated high school yet. So if you could graduate high school, graduate college, start your career, work your way to middle management in that 25 years, where could you go in a new career? That you're not starting back at 15. All those things that you've learned in the past 25 years, they still come with you. That's that transferable skill stuff that we talked about. So maybe you're going down a little bit, but it's more parallel. You're not going back to zero.
I love that. I think that's so powerful. I really do. And Mariel, I don't know if you have anything to add. I'm also, happy to move on, but yes.
Yeah, I just really quick, I agree with everything that's been said. I think, we spend the majority of our days and our lives kind of at work when you think about it. And so that's a lot of time to be doing something that you're not passionate about. And I think also too, you may always look back and wonder if you don't make a switch, like, what could that have been like? And my mom, is in her 60s and she just went back and got a certificate degree. So I think there's also too a lot of experiences that you probably like people, and connections that can kind of help to motivate you and inspire you there, and people that have done it successfully. So I would encourage people who are thinking about it, have that and figure out if it's really something you want to do.
Yeah, I love that. And it just made me think of something else too, which is like Coursera and edX, which are ways to sort of dabble in other areas with no cost and no application. You can sort of, if you even like learning about a certain area. So that's great. Thank you so much. I'm going to move on to our next theme, which is emotional mental preparedness. Mm-hmm. A lot of really good questions came in. The first one is honestly really practical. Someone asked, will switching careers always necessitate a pay decrease?
Not necessarily. I mean, it depends on what you're doing. If you're going from being a VP at a bank to opening your own pottery shop, probably.
Fair. In those expectations, right? I guess, and being realistic about like how much do you really want to make that change versus how much are you willing to give up.
What I wanted to add to the last thing that kind of crosses into the emotional piece is that I think in American culture, we've gotten to this place in this generation where we expect our job to be all of the things, to check all of the boxes. And if it doesn't, then we think like, oh, I must be doing the wrong thing. I don't want to like work harder and like hustle all the time. And that needs a reality check. And maybe if there's some aspect, maybe you really love pottery, but you also love making your bank salary, you can do both. It doesn't have to be your job. The number of times that people have been like, oh, you're so good at crochet, you should like open an Etsy shop, and be like, no, that would make me hate it.
Exactly.
You can have hobbies. It's okay.
I actually just had a conversation with my neighbor who's an amazing gardener, and I was like, you should just do this, because he's currently not at work because of pandemic. And he was like, no, never, because I would end up hating it. Exactly that.
I was going back to the pay cut. It might be the case, like I agree completely with Devin, depends on the career change that you're trying to make. But also I can see the pay cut happen for kind of like relevant careers, kind of like the project manager, product manager to a startup company, right? So that definitely does happen. I think it's more about like asking the right questions to the startup, right? And seeing if they had the funding to pay you. What's the how much equity are they gonna give you? Like, there's all this other like things that we can talk about startup, what it means like to work for a startup company. But that will be the only place where I think you might see that. Yes, there is like a significant pay cut for a lot of work, because you are building somebody's company from the ground up, right? It does require you to be there, like that hustle mentality, like working there all the time. So working for a startup, it is hard. And so a lot of times they can't pay you what a normal salary would be for that career.
Yeah, I think I agree, right? It depends on the industry or the role that you're transitioning into. I think, if you're really committed to making a change, I would encourage you to think long-term. So, is it worth maybe taking a pay cut for a year or two? Like, what's the earning potential out of that type of role? And also, I think meeting with people that are in that to really understand their journey and like, how long does it take, right? Like, just to relate it to sales and what I do, a lot of times people, may start entry level, but they can rise through the ranks pretty quickly where they're now making almost double their salary in a year or in a year and a half. So like, try to just get some more information on what that end goal is, and then really just keep that in mind and see if that's worth it for maybe a year or two with less salary.
And just to add to that, there's a lot of websites right now that you can literally check what the salary is for each location, right? So I have a student right now who started this job. The first year is $65K, right? But after 1 year of working there, her salary bumps up to 90. She's one of the lowest paid salary students that we have in our program. But she's like, I love the company, I love my team, I love everyone, and I'm only get to do this for 1 year before my salary jumps to 90. So I'm willing to take that pay cut for 1 year. So that's like an example, right? Like, you can find the salary numbers to know what the salary market rate is in the area that you live in, that's in those jobs. But also there's other companies out there that, especially if you're transitioning to this new position, they'll have sort of like what pad will be. So don't be afraid of asking those questions during the first chats or the first interview. Like, hey, what does the onboarding process look like? What does that, like, the career path look like for somebody in my position starting at your company? So those questions are so important. Sometimes they won't tell you the salary until the end, but at least you know that they do have a vision of what your role will be in that company for like the first 2 years, 3 years.
Love that. So practical. Thank you all. Okay. Next question. I'm going to actually read this question kind of verbatim. Someone's asking about help with confidence in a career change to tech. She's a preschool teacher looking for work as a front-end developer, and she feels like people assume she's unqualified because of her previous job, because it's so different. So her question is, how can she best manage her energy and cut self-doubt while starting out as a remote freelancer, doing this work?
I was a teacher in a former life, so that one sort of speaks to me.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, I find that this is something that happens a lot with teachers, is that one, we're not good at selling ourselves. And second, that people really don't have an accurate perception of what a teacher really does. Mm-hmm. They only see the performance. They remember when they were in a classroom or like the parent-teacher conference. They don't know all the stuff behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. And so you need to translate that. You know, you're in a fast-paced environment. You have multiple stakeholders. You have a constant like stream of consciousness of, you know, compliance and behavior and people management and content and timeliness. All of those things make you excellent for tech. It's just a matter of getting that point across. Mm-hmm. So making that holistic list of skills, look at some of those job descriptions and look at the wording that they use. Use that same wording on your resume and your cover letter and your conversations so that they get a picture. Because if you're writing about like, oh, I created curriculum plans for 22 students a year, they don't really know what that means. It's like you're speaking a completely foreign language to them. Mm-hmm. But your skills are super transferable. If you can corral a group of 10 to 20 preschoolers and get them to behave, you're going to do awesome on an engineering team.
I love that. That's great. Anyone else want to add? There's more questions. So many questions. All right.
I love that question.
Yeah.
If happy to talk to, I'm not sure if you mentioned the name, but happy to talk to them. That's what I do on a day-to-day basis with my students. So
that's so nice. I mean, I could probably, maybe, we'll see. I like to keep it anonymous. But if you're out there on the internet listening right now, reach out to Stephanie. She's got some feels. Sort of relatedly, another question was, how do you keep the momentum mentally when planning a transition, especially if it's easy to stay where you are? And I think that can only be the case for high-paying jobs if you want to do something like pottery. And you have those sweet golden handcuffs. How do you sort of mentally keep going?
Yeah, I think one thing I would say is just to remind yourself of why you're really doing this in the first place, right? Like really revisit what are those, goals or things that I'm hoping to get out of this long term. One other thing that I do that really helps me, I have a goal and I'm kind of struggling with it, is what they call manifesting. So really just picturing myself like on the other end of that, right? Like I've achieved it. How does this feel? It helps to remind me that there's a light at the end of the tunnel there. So again, kind of going back to that theme, I think of reminding yourself what your overall purpose is. And I think going into this, giving yourself enough time and enough runway to make the transition comfortably so you're not, even more stressed, because it is obviously a huge change and can have a lot of effects there. I think another thing I'd recommend too is, find some support systems as well. So maybe it's a mentor, a career coach, ideally someone that's done something like this before that can kind of speak to their own experiences and help you on those tougher days. But even like, friends, family, like just to have some people, I think, in your corner when you're having a tough day, really go a long way. So those would just be a couple of thoughts there.
Love it. Anyone else want to
add? Staying in the comfort zone space is a real thing, and that's just a natural. Any change can be like that, is like that. Even if we know that the change is going to be positive, it's like built into our human brain to resist the change. Because even if the current situation, your job is terrible, you know what to expect. Like it's a known quantity. Whereas this other thing could be anything. What if it's worse? So like all of that can really get in the way. And that's where having like the social support is helpful, but also being really transparent with yourself about what is it costing you to stay where you are.
Powerful question. Oof. Thank you for that. Stephanie, I saw you unmuted. I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
No, just So there was a few things that were just coming, super fast. But the first thing is like, don't leave your job if you're in the job. Because sometimes you're like, I'm just gonna do it. I'm gonna go for it, right? So don't lose that the income, that is coming your way. A lot of times it's like some of my students or people who I work with in the past, they just want to go for it, and especially during a pandemic year. Like we don't know what's gonna happen still, right? We're still living through it. So making sure that you still are okay financially, right? Because you don't want to do the job search too. And also be struggling with that. And also, if you don't have a job already, right, and you're currently struggling, it is really important to start building your time management, right? Because if not, you're gonna burn out. And so, and that ties in with wellness, right? Like you gotta be okay, but you also need to eat, and you need to cover your rent. You need to do all these other things that are important for you to be able to function, right? And look for another job or that transition. So keeping that in mind when you're building this like plan, when you're sitting with yourself and like putting like deadlines and timelines, and in this time management, you need to build in that time for, working out, like eating healthy, like eating, like making sure that you're taking care of yourself, right? So when you're building all those plans out, and it sounds like a lot, but honestly, if you sit down, like you said, like doing my Stephanie conference day all day, you definitely will be able to think about like, okay, how many hours can I spend studying? How many hours can I put towards this project? Okay, I can't give up my 1 hour of like spinning, right? Like I have to get that in, because if I don't get that in every day, I'm gonna burn out, and then I won't be able to continue with my discipline or my habits. So that's something that you should all be keeping in mind. Like, how can I do this without also burning myself out and being financially okay?
Yeah, I love that. And I also want to acknowledge that some questions have come in, and I'm going to go back to them afterward because I think that they tie in a little bit to some of the questions up front, and I'd love to keep it moving, if that's okay, into the third section, which is networking. So I love this. So first question, in a world of it's who you know, not what you know, how do we make space for people to shift career paths while not having the net to get you the interviews because you know someone who knows someone? Does that make sense?
You can tell Stephanie's like has these conversations all the time with her students. I was once a boot camp coach, so I resonate with that so hard. To be not couth bullshit. You know people and they know people. Maybe your first layer of contacts aren't in the industry you're thinking of going into, but guess what? They have cousins and uncles and friends and like college roommates. That's why LinkedIn persists, is because of the power of that tool to see that spider web effect. And, it's not sexy. It's not Instagram. It's not TikTok, but the reason why everyone that's looking for a job or in a job has a LinkedIn is because it lets you see those things. So maybe you might think, oh, I don't know anybody in software engineering. I can't network effectively and get a job. That's crap. You know lots of people who know lots of people, and I guarantee you at least some of them are in that engineering role or in that role that you want to have. They might just not be your first tier connections.
Love it.
Yeah, I second that. I think too, there's this connotation of like, oh, I don't want to be a burden to reach out to someone to ask them. Networking benefits everyone, because they in turn now have access to all of your connections, right? And to Devin's point, like the web just reaches so far. So I think like don't be afraid to reach out to someone, even if you maybe don't know them like firsthand. Like I think the reason why LinkedIn is such a strong platform is because it's so many people connecting and sharing when they maybe wouldn't have known any of those people prior. So like, send someone a quick email, really short, ask like, hey, I loved this article you wrote, or I'm really interested in getting here. Do you have 5-10 minutes to chat? So I think the power of it, not only people but being, okay with stepping out of your comfort zone a little bit is really important there.
Yeah, I love that, Mariel, so much and I will just share on the flip side, do your best to not just like spam connect with like a million people on LinkedIn without any sort of, I hate when I get a LinkedIn request and I'm like, why is this person connecting with me? I have no idea who this person is. There's no note. Yeah.
And there's no note. That's the thing, right? I always tell my students, you didn't send me a note. Ignore. Like, until you send me a note, because it's a habit too, right? It's weird. Like, I don't think it's harder. I don't know if they changed this, but on the app, you cannot send a note through the app from LinkedIn, and it was only available on desktop. So adding a note and being like, take the time to it doesn't take more than 2 minutes to go through somebody's LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. Right? And you can just read the about me and you can see what they're about. You can see if this is somebody that you really want to connect and send them a thoughtful note. You can start building a template, and like Mariel, you can share probably more about templates, but there's like a sales template that you can do, just like, hey, like I'm starting in this like industry. I'm so new to it. I saw that you also graduated from a boot camp and you're now working as a front-end engineer person. I'd love to talk to you more about your journey. Yeah. Do you have 20 minutes to jump on a quick call with me? Right? Yeah. And so being thoughtful about how you're writing those messages, and literally just, my friend Trish has a CAPTCHA where she puts in there, I will only accept your request if you put what's your favorite pie. And that's her thing. So she's like, I'm so sorry, like 60 something people who reached out to me, like, I'm not going to accept you because you clearly didn't read my profile. So
right. That's so true. I love that. Any other thoughts? Okay, no, everyone's on mute. Cool. And by the way, thanks to all the people who are like writing in the chat right now. I love seeing all of the comments in here. Some great ideas for sure. And I also want to highlight that the don't want to be a burden mentality is, also kicking that to the curb as well, which sort of goes back to sort of that mental preparedness for dealing with this, because everyone was there at some point in their career trying to figure it out too. Another question is, who should you reach out to about an informational interview? Is it HR? Is it a person in that position already? I think we'll start there. And then again, going back to that burden piece, I think someone had mentioned that specifically with that question.
Yeah, I think my recommendation would be to start with the person in the role. I think the reason for that is because you're going to, that's your best chance at getting firsthand experience, not only the positives, but the negatives, and also in theme with what we've been talking about, like, how did you get to where you're at today? And, HR and recruiters will give you some great insight, and especially insight into skill sets you might need for them to consider you, but they might not know all the ins and outs and the true day-to-day. So that's where I would start, I think, because that also helps you to determine, like, okay, is this something I really want to interview for and like throw my hat in the ring for or not? And then you can always go to HR or recruiting if you find that you're still interested.
Love that. I see nods. Devin, Stephanie, yeah, that's it. Talk to someone direct. I love that.
I mean, anyone.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah. When you're looking at your circle, if your second cousin is an administrative assistant at the company you really want to work for, but you want to be a designer, talk to her first. She probably knows who the designers are and can introduce you. So start wherever you're at.
Yeah, I love that. And I don't know if Stephanie, if you wanted to add anything, it's totally fine. I can move on.
Yeah, no, it's good. So even asking that person if they are working, engineering, and you want to get a job in marketing, like, hey, like having that first coffee chat, right? Just to learn more about the company. Do they like it there? Because let's say like, oh no, they're actually like, they're kind of like base camp, and it's pretty bad now. And so then they're gonna be like, well, I don't want to actually work there now, right? And so talk to them. And then if you are interested in the company, hey, could you kindly connect me to someone that can talk more about the software engineering role, right? And then you have that connection now. And then I think what Mario was mentioning with the different connections, definitely reach out to somebody that's in the role if you don't know anybody at all. And that's the first like cold message that you're sending out. For me, it hasn't worked out to like go for like sometimes like now we have a lot of D&I people who are working at these companies. Sometimes they will make time for you, but a lot of times they don't have that power to hire anybody. Right. And so just being careful with those of who you're like, what's the purpose of that meeting, first of all, right? Why are you trying to like talk to them? Because if you're reaching out to them like, I'm looking for a job, like they're like, okay, well, I have like 100 resumes right now that I'm going through. Like I'm not accepting any more applications. But if you're more like, hey, I'm trying to like, I'm starting out, like you're like having that thoughtful message again, like being authentic about what's going on instead of being, even though it is your goal to get a job, like, you know, not coming out with like straight up with that, right?
Yeah, I love that. And relatedly, I feel like this was already answered honestly earlier, but I just want to highlight it because several people have asked the question in several different ways, which is how to do this authentically, feeling really, really genuine about network, because sometimes it can feel gross and it can feel burdensome and it can feel, how do you do it to make it really feel like this is something that feels good?
One thing I would add in there, and this sort of relates a bit to, Stephanie had said this, but, you know, sales templates and things like that. I don't really read emails unless there's a custom piece of something that someone can show about me. Like they took some time to research my background. And so I think if you can find some common ground with someone, you know, Stephanie was saying like pull up their LinkedIn, maybe you went, you know their hometown, or you went to a similar school, or you have some shared connections. Like I think if you can go in and make the conversation a little bit more casual to begin with, that can just make it feel authentic. Like, you know, you're talking to someone at, you know, your office cooler or whatever that might be, as opposed to coming in with this big formal ask. And people, you know, love to feel like someone's interested in them and wants to learn more instead of just asking for something. So that, you know, anytime someone's reached out to me and been like, oh, I at your school, or I love this or that, like that always perks my ears up and, you know, breaks up your kind of mundane day a little bit too, to be receiving that.
Yeah, agreed. I'm happy to go to the last section, then we can get to these wonderful questions that are in the Q&A, which is advocating for your needs. And the first question is, how do you discuss a preference for being fully remote with employers that are interested in bringing staff back to the office, even if it's on a part-time basis? Really, it's about sort of how do you leverage that new acceptance of remote work, especially when you're, you know, in a place where you're sort of transitioning to a career, to a different career.
I just asked the company, what are the plans? So instead of making it about yourself, make about them, right? So like right now we're still figuring it out, right? What's the plan for Buildium right now for the rest of the year? What's it look like? Well, we're still figuring it out. We're going to be a hybrid company. We don't know yet, right? So I think that gives you insights of like whether or not they're going to be more willing to have that flexible environment or not. A lot of companies, like I have one student whose company was already always remote. So they're like, for us, nothing has changed. And then I have another one that is like, I was planning to move back home to Ohio with my family. And, you know, the company is expecting everyone to be back in the office in January 2022. And so, unfortunately, like, I'm not going to continue pursuing that. And I'm like, wait, don't say no yet. Talk to them about that, right? Like, if they get the offer, right? And then you can start talking to them about it. You can get a good sense by just asking them, like, what's the plan for, you know, X company about, like, the...
Yeah. And I want just a follow-up question to that. I think it's a really cool point is about, you know, get the job offer first and then ask. So they're bought into you as a person who they want to bring you in, and it's a lot more work for them to find someone else. Is there any concern around feeling like you're hiding anything because you know that this is something that's of concern early on, or is it okay to sort of just do that? Do you feel like it's a waste of time if they're like fully committed to we have to bring people back in the office and then you find out at the 11th hour? So I'm curious. It's tricky.
It is tricky. I think getting like the offer and being transparent about, like, I had a student who was struggling a lot at home, and they ended up needing to fly out to take care of their mom. And they're not going to disclose that during the interview process, okay? Until they get the offer. It's like, hey, I have this situation. I didn't feel like I needed to bring it up, but now, and I said, will you be willing to work with me on this? Right. And so I think it's just like having that honest conversation with them. And if they say no, right, and then you continue on, and like it will not be there, then that once you're in the job, it's actually not going to be a good, because they're not going to be as understanding of the current situation, right? Like you're dealing with, like going to appointments, like taking care of, like, especially like a lot of parents are going back to school right now. Yeah. And so it's like picking up the kids because there's nobody else who's helping them. So it is really tricky, and it depends on the company, but I think it says a lot about the company. How much are they willing to work with somebody?
Thank you. Anyone else want to add?
One just quick thing I would add there is I think, now that we've all come out of COVID, and for a lot of tech companies, people have been working remote full time for the past year or more. I think it will be those things where it's almost kind of a competitive edge for a company to allow more of that, whether it's a hybrid or full remote. And I think, there's also so many studies that have come out and shown that some sort of mix there is good for employee health, it's good for productivity. So I think, to Stephanie's point, if you find a company and you're excited and it turns out that they don't match your goals there, it's probably just, you'll find another company that you'll believe in that will have that. So I do think we'll start seeing more of that too.
Love that.
For the concern about, like, I'm hiding something, if it's really a non-negotiable for them, it's on them to be saying that at every step of the way as part of their screening process. Fair
point. Love your big brains. Final question from Prepared, which is someone asked, how do you create a development plan and have your manager help you grow once you're in this sort of new role in this new space?
Yeah, I can jump in there. So I think, when I have an employee that we have these chats, I guess, regularly, I should say. So, and I think that's the responsibility of the manager and of the business to be, getting you to that point where you're developing and you're, working towards the next step in your career. But I love when I see an employee of mine take the initiative to come up with a plan on their own, because it just shows that you're motivated, you're intrinsically, like, looking to get better and develop, and then your manager can work with you on those types of plans, right? But there's nothing worse as a manager than feeling like, okay, I'm going to come up with this whole plan for you. Maybe my employee's not on it. Maybe, like, you want them to have some say in it. So I think taking some initiative there is really key. Doing research, speaking with other people, maybe in your department that are really successful. How can you use those resources around you? And then also, like, how can you hold yourself accountable to those types of plans too? And how can you leverage your manager and those other resources to keep you accountable as well? So, I'll have reps that will ask me, like, hey, can you ping me about this and this because I forget? Or, can you check in with me every couple of weeks? So, like, those are all things that, if you can take those on yourself and you work together on that plan, it's just going to make it, feel like you have a voice in it a little bit.
Love that.
Just want to add to that, especially when you're changing careers and it's a new job and everything's pretty much new around you, right? Having that good onboarding process, which a lot of companies don't have, definitely helps. And having those weekly check-ins with your manager, right, to make sure that you are meeting the expectations, because you don't want to be 3 months in, 4 months in, and then you're let go. You're like, what happened? Like, I thought I was on good track. And then they're like, well, you didn't meet the expectations. You didn't do this, this, and that. And you're like, well, I didn't know. Or, yes, I did. Here's my checklist. And I documented my whole process. And also the goals, like making sure that you know exactly where you are in terms of your job with your manager. Like, hey, am I doing okay right now? Can you give me some feedback, right? I'm coming up to 1 year review. Can we start talking about, like, what will be, like, next for me, right? What are the first, like, the next, like, 3 months or the next couple months? look like for me to be on a good standing, right? And so like these are the things that I already improved on, these are the things I'm working on, and I really want to focus on this area, right? So I want to make sure that for our first year review we have some things that we can talk about and so on, right? Like you want to make sure that throughout this whole year you're in touch with that manager, because you don't want 3 months in, 6 months in, being like surprised that you're let go and you're like, I thought I was doing great. What happened? And so having those conversations and making sure you're getting feedback about what's going on is really, really helpful as you continue growing within the company.
Love that.
And that goes back to, your networking doesn't stop.
Right.
You need to develop that. So if you're shy about networking before you make the bid, that's something to work on. Because once you're in there, continuing to network, but within the company, like looking for mentors, looking at people who, what's at the next level, and continually evaluating that pathway and looking for ways forward. How did you do it? What was your ladder? What are the key skills that I should be developing in? That's how you're going to find that information out, is by talking to people that have done it rather than trying to reinvent the wheel.
Great advice. That was perfect. And also an excellent segue into the Q&A that is here. Because one question that was asked was, what are the most important skills that people need to learn if they're looking for career growth or transition? Recently found a startup to help people develop skills important through coaching and community. And they included a link. But yeah, we'll start there. And it's also skills and tools. I know a couple of people did ask about that, skills and tools for career transitions. Like what are some recommendations? Anyone, I can call on someone, but I won't.
Since we just left it off, networking, huge skill in terms of like actually going out and looking for a job when you're changing careers, maybe working with a resume writer or looking into how to make those transferable skills translatable, so that you're speaking the lingo of the field that you want to join. Another thing that brought up earlier is like taking care of yourself during all of this. Those motivating values, making sure that you're ticking them off on a daily basis is a huge way to like make sure that you don't burn out during the process.
That's great. Anyone else have anything to add?
Yeah, those are great. Going back to networking, know your energy levels. We have our program, it's 5 months, and every week our students are required to go to 3 networking events and have 5 coffee chats every week, on top of all the curriculum and all that stuff they need to do, right? And so the reason is because a lot of like Black and brown students don't have access to a big network, right? And so they need to build their network from scratch, especially when they're changing careers. And so that's something that we require them, like that's their goal. But a lot of our introverts have a hard time going to the networking events, right? They can do the coffee chats with no problem, but the networking events, it's hard. And so then it's communicating with our director of engineering to say like, hey, I'm exhausted. I can't even think, like, at the end of the day, like we finish class and then I have to go to a networking event. I can't do it. And so it's communicating with him. So yes, networking is important, know your levels, but also communication, right? So being able to communicate with different tools, different people. And so in one of those tools because I know we're talking about skills and tools, the other one that I was thinking about was getting familiar with project management tools. So if you're already thinking about developing your own plan of how you're going to transition, explore Asana, explore Trello. My personal favorite is Notion. I love working with Notion. Slack, join a community group so you can know how Slack works. She Geeks Out has one, so making sure that you join Slack, right? So you can get an understanding of like how tech companies are communicating now. So just like a few things that will be helpful as you are thinking on transition.
Amazing. We answered like 3 of the questions that are in the Q&A in one fall. No, it's amazing. Meryl, do you have anything to add?
I think they covered most of it really well. One thing I just would build on there is I think being really resourceful is going to help you here, right? Like you may have to get creative if you don't love the networking events. Like, maybe there's smaller groups that you should seek out as opposed to jumping into something with a ton of people. Like I know for this particular event, there's tables that have, specific sections. So things like that, like just try to figure out what your comfort level is and then, do some research and see what kind of opportunities are available for you to join.
I love that. Yeah. And thanks for the shout outs about the way we run our events in our Slack. I think that we cater to introverts because I call myself a closeted introvert. And Slack is great because you're just sort of chatting with people and you don't have to feel quite as vulnerable, I think. So it's kind of nice. That's great. And also I never heard of Notion, so I'm going to look that up. Let me see. Yeah. So someone just asked, I know we sort of touched on this a little bit earlier on, how do you get real experience when they're looking for new opportunities? And I know we touched upon the idea of doing work for free versus paid and getting creative on how to do that. I don't know if you have any further thoughts there or resources that you would recommend. And that's okay, because I feel like we kind of covered it. It's recorded, so Shweta, we're gonna get you the answers in the recording, so that is good. And then I think we got the time management planning habits. Stephanie mentioned a few. Meryl, Devin, if you have any other recommendations for time management, project management, anything along those lines. I'm a nerd about it, so I personally feel like those are really, really critical skills for anything. Especially this.
I'm a big fan of David Allen and getting things done. It's like my first stop for people that are struggling with time management and focus. Like, go do that. Yeah. And then come back to me.
Yeah, and there's also Atomic Habits, which I think has been widely recommended. A little book list. I'll get a little link list started. I feel like a blog post is forming from this conversation, which is great. Meryl, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think time management is a tough one, right? One thing I would say that just has worked well for me is, I live and breathe by my calendar, but I try really hard not to overload stuff because sometimes I'll be like, okay, I'm going to get up at 8 and do this. And all of a sudden my whole day is booked and I don't get to everything. So try to just set realistic goals for yourself. Time management, I think, is something people oftentimes across the board are constantly working on improving. So just try to, set realistic goals for yourself there.
I love that. And that actually reminds me of something else I would recommend. Calendly is free. I think there's paid versions of it, but that's also a really nice way to give. If it's a little tricky because you want to get people to feel like you're really connecting with them, but it's also really efficient. I personally love getting a Calendly link because then I feel like there's less back and forth on timing if you want to set up an opportunity to talk with someone. So I recommend getting a free Calendly or some other meeting booking tool thing as well. So we did time management, and one question that someone had asked about, and we did have someone else write about this as well, is what happens for someone who's got like the PhD, the fancy degree, and then they're switching and people are like, you've already got a PhD in this thing and now you want to switch this career? Like, what's up with that? Do you have any thoughts on how to address that question that may come from a potential employer?
So many thoughts. This is where the transferable skills really come in. And so if you're going outside of research and development, there's just a misunderstanding sometimes about like what a PhD really entails. And it's not just about being a subject matter expert. So digging into like what are those transferable skills? How do they align with the role that you want so that you can articulate it? And then why did you get a PhD if you want to do this other thing? It's none of your damn business.
Love it. Does anyone want to follow up with that? Like, all right, I think the mic has been dropped. I'm just going to move that.
Honestly, that's a tough one to follow.
Yeah, it's fair. No, don't feel like you need to, but you go ahead if you want to.
The only thing I'd add there, I think, to Devin's point is like, you know, a lot of people don't really know everything that goes into a PhD, right? Like, what are some of the additional soft skills and things that wouldn't be so obvious on the surface? And you know, that's a huge asset to have, even if it doesn't directly relate to maybe what you're doing. It shows that you are really motivated, right? You're eager to progress and do well in your career. And so there's so many just great things and great ways I think you can spin that and just show that makes you an even more valuable employee.
Love that. Agree. Just very quickly back to tools. I want to just acknowledge that Whitney had mentioned that she learned about ATS system. I think the applicant tracking systems. I think that I'm going to sort of tweak it a little bit, but like as far as determining the skills that you need, I think part of it is also like we know that you know, there's the networking piece, and of course it's, you know, but then let's say you want to apply for a job, it's relatively entry level, you feel good about it, and you want to get that resume out there, and you know that there's the systems in place that will read your resume and will discard or bring you in based on a variety of factors. Is there any sort of consideration that you need to take as you're moving into these new careers? And Whitney, feel free to reframe it in chat if you'd like. That's my question. What you wrote.
I think we mentioned this earlier, like making sure that you're translating it.
Sorry, what was that, Devin?
Making sure that you're translating to the language of like what they're looking for, getting that keyword match in.
Yeah.
So literally open that role description that you're applying for, go through it line by line and think about how would I address this? How am I going to address this? Is there a term? Maybe they're using the term collaborate, but on yours you said work with a team. Could you change it to collaborate? Bang, you've got another keyword on there. Job scan somebody shared is a tool. There's also free ones out there if you take a look around that will just scan and tell you what's missing.
Great. Good. And then final question that just came in from Sarah about doing work projects to build a portfolio. What are some considerations or advice on navigating that process when multiple marginalized identities, since we're often undervalued for our labor? Good question. Anyone feel comfortable taking that one?
I'm just gonna reread the question.
Yeah, I know, Stephanie, this is your world.
This is my jam.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so about doing work projects to build a portfolio, what are some considerations or advice on navigating that process when you hold marginalized identities? Yes, we are undervalued for our labor. You have to prove yourself, even like you have to work harder to prove yourself, right? And especially like women, you know, it's, yeah, we deserve another. Actually, she geeks out those panels on this all the time. So, so keep an eye on their Twitter and everything. So, yeah, so I think like for us, like reselling coders, like we have, and it depends on like what it is. If you are a marketing person, you can also build like a whole social media plan. You can do like content marketing. You can work with different organizations that are tied to what identity or what cause you really care about. Some of our students, especially like this, say they're going to be actually presenting their demo day projects, which a lot of them build stuff that they care, that they're passionate about. And so even though we could have a curriculum where everybody presents the same project, we switch it up. And so when employers come to see our students and meet our students, they get to see what they really care about, right? What are some of the causes? And that also makes sure that employers get to know who that person is as well, right? We had somebody in the past who built a whole Canvas like app. Obviously, that didn't fly too well with our like financial management employers because they are like doing background checks on that. So, yeah. So anyway, so I think like okay, the same question in here, but I'm sorry. I'm like looking like the pop-up questions, and I just saw another one come up. But yeah, so I think like I'm happy to like talk more about this on building your projects. I think to start off, a lot of students do little things like code words, or even if you're a designer, like find your most amazing like artist or something like that, and try to replicate that mock-up, right? Or if you have an idea, there's tons of different like Figma is one of them. If you don't know about Figma, it's a great way that is free, and you can just design your own work in there, and you can start putting it on a portfolio. There's a lot of portfolios that you don't need to like build from scratch. You can just like plug in things in there, and so those are available out there too. So there's different things. I think what you want to show is a little bit about what are the causes that you care about, why you built it, your thought process, right? Like how did you actually went ahead and like started like problem solving? Those are the things that employers a lot of times look for, especially when it comes to designers and engineers. But I'm happy to talk more about this offline as well.
Yeah, thank you.
It sounds like that's also about like making sure that you're not abused. So before you get started, and this was really true building a business, it's like, you know, you've got to take on some things as like to build that social proof, or maybe like you're going to ramp up and not charge like your full whatever, all of those things. But to have that clear in your mind, the best description it was given to me early on was, what's your giving line? So like on this side, these are things I'm willing to give away. This is what I'm not willing to give away. This I need to get paid for no matter what, so that I don't get resentful. And to reevaluate where that giving line is as you go along, especially if you're starting to notice, like if you feel resentful about it, then you're giving away too much.
So originally coders, we just have a saying, and it's just simple: fuck you, pay me. That's it.
Yes.
Right? Like, you know, you got to get paid for the work that you do. Yeah. That's it. And I agree with Devon in that sense. Like, here's what I can do for you. Here's what I can, especially if you're working as a freelancer, here's what I can build: a page that has like XYZ, right? Or I can build this, or I can give you 500 grand in blog posts. And then that, like, are they willing to pay for that? Yeah. Right? If not, you go and find other clients, right? But you're not, like Devon said, like there's a line, like you do have to pay me. There's no like, and it sucks because a lot of times in the community, because they see that you're a recent grad or you're a bootcamp student, a lot of companies, they just don't pay, right? And it's like, no, you gotta pay me for my work. Interns, like Massachusetts, it's illegal to hire an intern and not pay them, right? And so there's a lot of eyes now on this sort of like, honestly, like really awful, I don't want to like swear anymore, but awful behaviors by a lot of this like companies. So definitely have your lines, like how much are you, like have your plans of like what are you willing to offer that company, have your lines of like where you're not willing to give out, and also always get paid.
And just to piggyback on that, I just want to say, like, I get it, because I think that there is this mentality that we who experience any sort of marginalized identity have been told that we are lucky to be given the opportunity to have a job, to be working for this company, to do anything that's related to something that may give us some joy. And because we're so lucky, we shouldn't expect to be paid what we deserve to be paid. But the script is now, it's been lovely to see this. I think it is starting to flip, where what Stephanie is saying is, I think, starting to resonate more and more with folks who understand that they are providing a value and a service to a company, whether it's freelance or within the company. And that is whether it is the job that they were hired to do, or frankly, any of the DEI work that a lot of folks bring to their companies. It is service that they are giving to that company, and they should therefore be compensated accurately for it. And so it's changing that mindset of realizing I'm not lucky, they're lucky to have me as part of this. And it's a partnership. It's not a one-way street. So I feel really passionate about that. Sorry, I added some thoughts on there. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add to that. I think we have, and I know we're a little bit over time. So I just want to see, and I think this is a really, really common, and we sort of touched on it a little bit, but I think because we're in the pandemic, and some folks have been out of work for a longer period of time, how to spin that positively. I mean, I have a feeling I know what folks are going to say. So if anyone wants to jump in with a final thought or anything around the space, and then we'll kick it back out to some networking, feel free. Or I'll just jump in. I'll say it. I mean, the pandemic has actually given us a reason to be able to to say that this is why we maybe are out of work for a little bit longer, whether it's for personal reasons or because of business reasons. There are so many reasons why I think companies are being a little bit more graceful than maybe they would have been if there weren't a global pandemic. So that's my answer, McKenna. I don't know if anyone else has any final thoughts before we transition on career to cover everything. Do people feel good?
Yeah, I feel great. I think for anything that you all do, it's just having that day to yourself. We talk about a lot of stuff, understanding your values, understanding what skills are transferable, but building that story and practicing it. Like we call it like pitching, right? So pitch to your family members, and always tie it back for whatever company that you're thinking of applying or you're interviewing. Tie it back to that company, right? Like, here's my background, and this is why I really want to work at this company, right? And so always tie it back, but it really, crafting your story to make sure that it sounds well, it does take time. Mm-hmm. So please, like, do have a 1-day conference, Stephanie Day, and sit down with yourself and really write down, like, how are you gonna, and I hate to say it this way, but sell yourself to the companies.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think, my big things coming out of it would just be like, have confidence in yourself. And, obviously it's a really daunting thing to switch careers, but people do it successfully all the time, and just hold on to whatever that thing is that you're chasing and whatever that rewarding piece is. And don't be afraid to ask for help too. There's so many great resources available and people, and it can be challenging to do it alone. So, just try to find people that will help you to that next step in your journey, and use those resources.
Awesome. Debbie, close us out.
Your life is too short to be in a place where you're really unhappy. So do the work. Maybe there is a way to be happy where you are, but don't just stay in that limbo of dreading and having the Mondays and the Tuesdays and the Wednesdays and oh my God, is it Friday yet?
And if the pandemic has taught us nothing, it is understanding that life is very, very short.
Absolutely.
So thank you all so much for being a part of this. This was really helpful. I learned things. It looks like some other folks learned things, which is wonderful. That's the goal. What we'll do now is we're going to kick this over into the networking tables for another 25 or so minutes. Feel free to find a table that resonates with you, to talk in small groups with other folks. There are some Buildium tables, so if you want to meet some Buildians, you are welcome to do that. We are on all of the socials, and we have a Slack. I am personally managing our Instagram account, so if you have any suggestions or thoughts while our wonderful marketing manager is on family leave, you let me know, because ideas are welcome. And we'll see you on the internet and in